because the
and
relationships
then
are
there'll
on
be
two
a
different
time when
sides,
time
and
draws you apart.
matter, it still functions.
So now we'll say thanks for coming, Spalding, and
I want to move on to the next play. It's called A Beautiful View, we were just saying. And in this play, the monster is outside. The monster is out there. It's not within the two characters per se. There are two women who we meet. They always play themselves.
They always play themselves.
They always play
always
themselves.
Play themselves. Yes.
So
they always play them. Yes, they always play these characters. Yes, they play. Yes, they are. They not. I'm just making a difference between Spalding Gray. I kind of play my actual self to a certain extent.
Yes.
But these two actors play these two characters all the way through.
Right, correct. Right. So they're two characters and they don't transform
Into
character.
other characters,
but
no.
they do travel across time and place.
You get much of that.
In similar ways to you do in your other work. And so I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about what I'm referring to as the monster in that play. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think at the time, I think I'll just describe a little bit of kind of what it's about.
Thank you.
And then, so basically, it's these two women who identify as heterosexual, and they meet kind of what you would call in rom-com land cute meet. And they don't quite like one another very much, but they kind of have this, they kind of meet 1, 2, 3 times over the course of a short period of time, and discover that they're actually really kind of love one another, and have become great friends, and very early in those first meetings, each identifies the other as lesbian, even though they aren't, but they just make assumptions. And so the first night that they sort of meet at this bar again after having met a couple of other times, and then they end up spending this kind of drunken night together, and each allows the other to be seduced by the lesbian. And then freak out. One of them freaks out very much. And then meet again later, sometime later, and oh, that crazy night. And then they discover that neither is a lesbian, and they have to become culpable for their own place in that moment, which they actually very much enjoyed. And so what ends up happening is we have a love affair between two women who have never identified as anything other than straight, and become very confused as to what tribe they belong to now. Mm-hmm. What is their identity? Because they have a lot of ideas about what it means to be in a same-sex relationship, and they don't feel like that they fit into any of those ideas that they have been given. Mm-hmm. And so so there's kind of the monster is two things in a way. The monster is the idea that we do need to identify, which is amazing that this play is 10 years old, and I feel like we are finding ourselves in this world where identity is becoming a bit of a monster. It's always been difficult to navigate, as I can tell you. Always been difficult to navigate identity. But now there's such a light on it, navigating identity, and we're expected, and people in their 20s are expected to be able to speak to identity in a way that I'm 55 years old, and I think only in the last few years I'm able to speak to identity. I mean, we don't think we should be expected to speak to identity in our 20s. We should be exploring, but so anyway, this play feels like it's about all of that stuff, and the monster of that. There's also the other monster is just simple fear. The idea of being afraid to be intimate, the afraid to be vulnerable, afraid to be seen. All of those fears is embodied in an actual kind of physical monster of a bear.
Mm-hmm. And I think that what you were saying about just to reiterate what we were saying about the two women meet, and what happens is they project their own sexual desire onto the other person, and they both do this simultaneously, because each of them identifies as heterosexual, each of them are heterosexual, have had that's their life, that's how they know themselves, and then when that longing comes up, they both assume at the same time that it's the other person who's instigating this longing and that they're going along with it.
It's a love story in that it's like you meet that person. They met that person, and that person happened to be another woman. What do you do? They're the perfect pair.
And yes, and so this is where identity as a monster, I guess is one way to say it, because it's a limiting frame. So you see yourself as one thing, and then you're automatically always shutting off all of these other options. You're just turning them off without even realizing that you're turning them off, because identity can be a very solidifying, calcifying, I guess,
Instead of understanding the fluidity of it, and so that, and you also, so you attach to identity, and then you feel to change or to move out of it is to somehow betray something or fail something.
Yeah, and so after they have this first romantic night where each of them thinks they've just slept with a lesbian, so each of them thinks that they're the heterosexual who's just slept with a lesbian.
Who's been seduced.
Who's been seduced by someone else. So simultaneously, they realize that that's not true, and they go off in their own directions, and they abandon that relationship, and they abandon those feelings that they have for each other. One of them gets married, a whole bunch of things ensue. And then finally they come back together, but this other monster, if I may, this fear of following that love, that's the next monster, wouldn't you say?
Yes, and it keeps them from I suppose if we're talking about meta theater or metaphysics, there's an element of destiny, there's an element of the idea that we're on a path that has some direction, some destination, and so in this case it's like they've been directed on a path that they refuse to embrace. And that raises a whole bunch of other questions about belief in destiny or belief in or faith in anything. But yes, so there's a lot of tension between what they feel is needed and what they feel is correct.
Right. And so I know that the class didn't read either of those plays we've been talking about, but reading Daniel's plays is incredibly pleasurable and quick. Like, it's one of those things where you say time. I said to myself, I open the play, and next thing I know, I'm done. And I'm like, where's my next play? So I encourage you, they're on the library, they're everywhere, so feel free to get them if any of those themes interest you.